The mystery of the 72, a hidden brotherhood that still shapes the spiritual destiny of the world. Have you ever wondered why Jesus, known for his precision, purpose, and profound symbolism, chose exactly 72 disciples to send on a special mission, apart from the well-known 12 apostles? It's a question that most people don't ask, perhaps because the answer feels veiled, tucked behind layers of sacred mystery. But hidden in plain sight, within chapter 10 of the Gospel of Luke, lies a passage that invites a deeper exploration. After this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them 2 by 2 ahead of him to every town and place where he was about to go. It sounds simple. But what if this moment reveals one of the most powerful spiritual operations in all of human history? What if the selection of the 72 was not merely logistical, but cosmic, tied to ancient knowledge, numerology, esoteric science, and a mission that has quietly shaped civilizations across centuries? Let's peel back the layers together. Are you ready? Let's begin. Who are these mysterious 72? Why don't their names echo in the halls of church teachings, or appear in the spotlight of Sunday sermons? Their anonymity is not an accident. It may, in fact, be a clue. Unlike the 12 apostles, whose journeys and voices shaped the New Testament, the 72 are only briefly mentioned. But that brevity is powerful. It suggests not insignificance, but intentional concealment, perhaps even protection. Jesus sent them ahead of him, 2 by 2, to the towns and places he would later visit. This was no simple outreach effort. He chose them as spiritual path clearers, advanced envoys who would prepare the energetic soil before his physical steps arrived. Imagine that. These individuals were not ordinary followers. They were spiritually attuned emissaries, initiated into something greater than doctrine, tasked with carrying an invisible current of divine energy. Their selection wasn't random either. In Jewish tradition, the number 72 has deep spiritual resonance. Genesis speaks of 72 nations descending from Noah after the flood, a symbolic representation of all humanity. By choosing 72 disciples, Jesus was signaling a message. This mission was for everyone. Not for one tribe, not for one religion, but for the whole world. And yet, it wasn't just about symbolism. The number 72 vibrates with sacred geometry, cosmology, and numerology. It's woven into ancient mystical systems that predate Christianity. Jesus wasn't just acting as a teacher. He was functioning as a spiritual architect, building a bridge between heaven and earth, infusing his mission with numbers that echoed across civilizations. This was a blueprint, not a parable. Now consider this: Jesus sent them out in pairs. That might seem practical, like a buddy system for safety and support. But on a deeper level, it mirrors the ancient traditions of initiatory schools and mystery teachings. From the Egyptian temples to Druidic groves, pairs were central to transformation. Why? Because in partnership, energy flows. In reflection, truth emerges. In mutual support, light amplifies. These were not just traveling companions. They were spiritual mirrors, pairs designed to awaken, challenge, and elevate one another. They were students and teachers to each other in motion. The journey itself was a crucible, shaping not just their message but their very being. They were being spiritually transmuted as they walked, alchemists of the soul, not just messengers of words. But what happened to them after their mission? Here's where things grow silent, and that silence is thunderous. No books. No letters. No epistles from the 72. No canonized names. Were they forgotten? Or were they hidden? Could their mission have been so sacred, so infused with light, that it couldn't be committed to ordinary history? Perhaps their work was meant to remain outside the linear timeline, humming quietly through the hearts of mystics, healers, and seekers ever since. This leads us into the realm of the esoteric, the invisible brotherhoods, the sacred orders, the soul missions that operate not from pulpits, but from silence. Many mystics believe the 72 still exist, not as the same individuals, but as an eternal archetype. In every era, in every great spiritual turning point, a new generation of the 72 rises, hidden, unnamed, unwavering in their purpose. Theirs is not the work of glory, but of frequency. They don't seek applause. They raise the vibration of the world. Their lives are tuning forks, resonating consciousness, stabilizing light, and quietly shifting timelines. Numerologically, 7 plus 2 is equal to 9, a number associated with spiritual completion, the final threshold before rebirth. And 72 divides evenly into the 360 degrees of the zodiac, forming 5 exact parts. In ancient astrology, each fifth was overseen by a celestial guardian. Could it be that Jesus' 72 were living zodiacal points, light-bearers stationed like acupuncture needles in the planetary body? Each one a guardian of an energy center, a spiritual ley line, a hidden node of awakening. The parallels don't stop there. Egyptian texts, especially the Book of the Dead, describe the soul being judged by 72 divine judges. And in cosmic time, 72 years marks the period for a star to shift 1 degree in the great precession of the equinoxes. Again, the number links heaven and earth, light and time. It seems clear, Jesus wasn't just planting churches. He was planting frequencies, consciousness seeds, sacred codes designed to bloom in future cultures. And according to some spiritual historians, these disciples may have quietly traveled to India, North Africa, and early Europe. Their presence could be the root of movements like Sufism, the Cathars, and other mystical paths that defied dogma and embraced inner divinity. Are those the ripples of the original mission? Even more stunning is the idea that the mission of the 72 never ended. That this isn't just a story from the past, but a calling echoing into today. Perhaps right now, as you read this, another 72 are awakening, men and women whose work will never trend, but who shape the spirit of the world nonetheless. They don't stand on platforms. They don't publish gospels. But they live in service. They carry the flame of the inner Christ. They are in cities and forests, universities and refugee camps. Their only pulpit is the human heart. Their only sermon is their presence. Why did Jesus choose 72? Because he understood archetypes, energy, cosmic rhythms. Because he saw beyond time. He knew that to change the world, you don't just speak loudly, you seed quietly. And those seeds? They took root across continents, across generations. They became art, insight, courage, forgiveness. They became teachers without credentials, mothers of wisdom, children with ancient eyes. They became the quiet force that has never stopped humming behind the chaos. In Hebrew mysticism, 72 is the number of the expanded name of God, Shem HaMephorash, formed by combining 3 verses of Exodus 14. Each of these 72 names holds a distinct spiritual vibration, a key to higher consciousness. They are not just words. They are power fields, radiant forces of divine intelligence. Could it be that each of Jesus' 72 embodied one of these divine aspects? That each disciple was a channel, a living name of God walking among us? A cosmic note played in the great melody of human awakening? Renaissance mystics like Cornelius Agrippa and Ramon Huy believed the 72 names were operational codes, used in alchemy, transformation, and spiritual ascent. Rosicrucians and Essenes later saw these names as stairways to higher worlds, ladders of initiation, secret keys passed from soul to soul. Each name, a frequency. Each disciple, a transmitter. Together, they formed an invisible symphony across the earth. And geometry, too, confirms this pattern. The sacred circle, symbol of the infinite, the divine, contains 360 degrees. Divide that by 5, and you get 72. In ancient thought, every fifth was guarded by an energy, a presence, a celestial force. Is it a coincidence? Or is it a whisper across time? The story of the 72 is not over. It's not just a forgotten paragraph in Luke. It's a living code, an ongoing activation. Perhaps even now, your spirit feels its call. Perhaps you are one of those who sense there is work to be done, not loudly, but deeply. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs vibration. It needs those willing to awaken in silence and carry light where no spotlight reaches. You don't have to be famous to be one of the 72. You just have to be willing. So ask yourself, who are the 72 today? Could you be one of them? The path is quiet, but powerful. The work is invisible, but eternal. And the time is now. The hidden mission of the 72 disciples, an untold legacy of spiritual transformation. Why did Jesus appoint precisely 72 disciples, in addition to the well-known 12 apostles, and send them ahead of him in pairs? Why is this detail, mentioned only briefly in the Gospel of Luke, shrouded in such mystery? It may seem like a simple choice of numbers, but nothing Jesus did was without purpose. The more we look at this sacred number and the mission behind it, the more we uncover layers of spiritual depth, hidden wisdom, and a possible spiritual order still alive today. The Gospel of Luke tells us that Jesus appointed 72 others and sent them 2 by 2 to every town and place where he himself intended to go. These disciples were not just assistants or passive followers. They were forerunners, preparing the energetic and spiritual environment for Christ's arrival. Theirs was a task of deep spiritual responsibility. To be sent by Jesus himself, in this way, implies that they had reached a level of inner readiness, perhaps even initiation. These were not ordinary believers. They were spiritual operatives, bearers of a hidden task. The fact that we know almost nothing about them is not an accident. Their anonymity is meaningful. In scriptures filled with names and genealogies, their absence is a message in itself. This silence does not signal their unimportance, it hints at something more profound, a mission so sacred, it had to remain hidden, shielded from history's noise and distortion. It is in this space of mystery that the deeper truth begins to emerge. The number 72 is no ordinary figure. In Jewish tradition, it represents the 72 nations that emerged after the flood, as recorded in Genesis. It is a number symbolizing the whole of humanity. By choosing 72, Jesus was symbolically extending his message and mission to all the peoples of the earth. But beyond its symbolic meaning, the number itself vibrates with sacred resonance across many ancient traditions. This number echoes through Jewish mysticism, particularly the Kabbalah, where it refers to the Shem HaMephorash, the 72 names of God. Each name consists of 3 Hebrew letters and represents a distinct divine energy, a frequency of the Creator. These names are not simple labels but spiritual tools, keys that unlock dimensions of divine action and consciousness. Jesus, immersed in Jewish thought and mysticism, surely understood this. His decision to align his mission with this number is no coincidence. It is deliberate, encoded with layers of spiritual strategy. But Jesus did not only select 72, he sent them 2 by 2. This detail, 2, is rich with meaning. Pairing is a principle found throughout ancient initiatory traditions. In the Egyptian temples, among the Druids, and within early mystery schools, disciples often trained in pairs. This wasn't for convenience or companionship alone, it was spiritual science. Pairs created a dynamic of reflection and mutual amplification. One saw in the other what was still hidden within themselves. Together, they acted as mirrors, balancing and raising each other's consciousness. Their mission was external, but their journey was inward as well. As they moved through villages, sowing seeds of spiritual readiness, they were also undergoing an internal transformation. Each step was a lesson. Each encounter was an initiation. They were being refined, not just as messengers, but as vessels of divine presence. And then, silence. After their mission, we hear no more about the 72. No letters, no biographies, no canonized teachings. What happened to them? Were they erased from history? Or was their work never meant to be documented in the traditional sense? Some believe they were silenced. Others propose a more intriguing idea. Their mission was too sacred for the written word. Their work had to remain hidden because it dealt not with dogma but with direct transmission of spiritual energy. They were part of an invisible order, a spiritual lineage that worked behind the scenes of human events, not in the spotlight but in the shadows of consciousness. Mystical scholars and esoteric traditions often refer to the 72 as a hidden spiritual body, an ethereal group that operates not on the visible plane, but in subtler realms. Their work is vibrational. Their task is to harmonize the consciousness of humanity, to prepare sacred ground in cultures, movements, and hearts. They were never meant to be public figures. Their greatness lies in their invisibility. This might explain why their stories are missing from the canonical texts. They were not part of the external story of Jesus, but the internal mission of the Christ energy, cosmic, eternal, beyond time. Numerology reinforces this idea. The sum of 7 and 2 is 9, the number of spiritual completion. In esoteric systems, 9 represents the end of a cycle and the beginning of new life. The 72, then, were agents of transition, initiators of the new consciousness Jesus came to awaken. More than that, 72 is a perfect divisor of 360, the degrees of a circle. In astrology, this links directly to the celestial wheel. Divide the circle into 5 equal parts and you get 72 degrees, suggesting that each of the 72 could correspond to a specific energy, a spiritual point in a great mandala spread across the earth. Their mission, then, was to plant sacred vibrations in specific places, like spiritual acupuncture points across the planetary body. These ideas are not fantasy. Ancient Egyptian cosmology recognized 72 divine judges in the afterlife. In astronomy, 72 years marks the time it takes for a star to shift 1 degree in the precession of the equinoxes. These are not numbers chosen at random. They connect time, space, spirit, and soul. Jesus knew this. He worked not just with miracles but with metaphysical architecture. He was reviving a pattern, a divine geometry buried in the consciousness of humanity. Renaissance mystics like Cornelius Agrippa and Ramon Llull believed the 72 names were operational codes, used in alchemy, transformation, and spiritual ascent. Rosicrucians and Essenes later saw these names as stairways to higher worlds, ladders of initiation, secret keys passed from soul to soul. Each name, a frequency. Each disciple, a transmitter. Together, they formed an invisible symphony across the earth. And geometry, too, confirms this pattern. The sacred circle, symbol of the infinite, the divine, contains 360 degrees. Divide that by 5, and you get 72. In ancient thought, every fifth was guarded by an energy, a presence, a celestial force. Is it a coincidence? Or is it a whisper across time? The story of the 72 is not over. It's not just a forgotten paragraph in Luke. It's a living code, an ongoing activation. Perhaps even now, your spirit feels its call. Perhaps you are one of those who sense there is work to be done, not loudly, but deeply. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs vibration. It needs those willing to awaken in silence and carry light where no spotlight reaches. You don't have to be famous to be one of the 72. You just have to be willing. So ask yourself, who are the 72 today? Could you be one of them? The path is quiet, but powerful. The work is invisible, but eternal. And the time is now. The hidden mission of the 72 disciples, an untold legacy of spiritual transformation. Why did Jesus appoint precisely 72 disciples, in addition to the well-known 12 apostles, and send them ahead of him in pairs? Why is this detail, mentioned only briefly in the Gospel of Luke, shrouded in such mystery? It may seem like a simple choice of numbers, but nothing Jesus did was without purpose. The more we look at this sacred number and the mission behind it, the more we uncover layers of spiritual depth, hidden wisdom, and a possible spiritual order still alive today. The Gospel of Luke tells us that Jesus appointed 72 others and sent them 2 by 2 to every town and place where he himself intended to go. These disciples were not just assistants or passive followers. They were forerunners, preparing the energetic and spiritual environment for Christ's arrival. Theirs was a task of deep spiritual responsibility. To be sent by Jesus himself, in this way, implies that they had reached a level of inner readiness, perhaps even initiation. These were not ordinary believers. They were spiritual operatives, bearers of a hidden task. The fact that we know almost nothing about them is not an accident. Their anonymity is meaningful. In scriptures filled with names and genealogies, their absence is a message in itself. This silence does not signal their unimportance, it hints at something more profound, a mission so sacred, it had to remain hidden, shielded from history's noise and distortion. It is in this space of mystery that the deeper truth begins to emerge. The number 72 is no ordinary figure. In Jewish tradition, it represents the 72 nations that emerged after the flood, as recorded in Genesis. It is a number symbolizing the whole of humanity. By choosing 72, Jesus was symbolically extending his message and mission to all the peoples of the earth. But beyond its symbolic meaning, the number itself vibrates with sacred resonance across many ancient traditions. This number echoes through Jewish mysticism, particularly the Kabbalah, where it refers to the Shem HaMephorash, the 72 names of God. Each name consists of 3 Hebrew letters and represents a distinct divine energy, a frequency of the Creator. These names are not simple labels but spiritual tools, keys that unlock dimensions of divine action and consciousness. Jesus, immersed in Jewish thought and mysticism, surely understood this. His decision to align his mission with this number is no coincidence. It is deliberate, encoded with layers of spiritual strategy. But Jesus did not only select 72, he sent them 2 by 2. This detail, 2, is rich with meaning. Pairing is a principle found throughout ancient initiatory traditions. In the Egyptian temples, among the Druids, and within early mystery schools, disciples often trained in pairs. This wasn't for convenience or companionship alone, it was spiritual science. Pairs created a dynamic of reflection and mutual amplification. One saw in the other what was still hidden within themselves. Together, they acted as mirrors, balancing and raising each other's consciousness. Their mission was external, but their journey was inward as well. As they moved through villages, sowing seeds of spiritual readiness, they were also undergoing an internal transformation. Each step was a lesson. Each encounter was an initiation. They were being refined, not just as messengers, but as vessels of divine presence. And then, silence. After their mission, we hear no more about the 72. No letters, no biographies, no canonized teachings. What happened to them? Were they erased from history? Or was their work never meant to be documented in the traditional sense? Some believe they were silenced. Others propose a more intriguing idea. Their mission was too sacred for the written word. Their work had to remain hidden because it dealt not with dogma but with direct transmission of spiritual energy. They were part of an invisible order, a spiritual lineage that worked behind the scenes of human events, not in the spotlight but in the shadows of consciousness. Mystical scholars and esoteric traditions often refer to the 72 as a hidden spiritual body, an ethereal group that operates not on the visible plane, but in subtler realms. Their work is vibrational. Their task is to harmonize the consciousness of humanity, to prepare sacred ground in cultures, movements, and hearts. They were never meant to be public figures. Their greatness lies in their invisibility. This might explain why their stories are missing from the canonical texts. They were not part of the external story of Jesus, but the internal mission of the Christ energy, cosmic, eternal, beyond time. Numerology reinforces this idea. The sum of 7 and 2 is 9, the number of spiritual completion. In esoteric systems, 9 represents the end of a cycle and the beginning of new life. The 72, then, were agents of transition, initiators of the new consciousness Jesus came to awaken. More than that, 72 is a perfect divisor of 360, the degrees of a circle. In astrology, this links directly to the celestial wheel. Divide the circle into 5 equal parts and you get 72 degrees, suggesting that each of the 72 could correspond to a specific energy, a spiritual point in a great mandala spread across the earth. Their mission, then, was to plant sacred vibrations in specific places, like spiritual acupuncture points across the planetary body. These ideas are not fantasy. Ancient Egyptian cosmology recognized 72 divine judges in the afterlife. In astronomy, 72 years marks the time it takes for a star to shift 1 degree in the precession of the equinoxes. These are not numbers chosen at random. They connect time, space, spirit, and soul. Jesus knew this. He worked not just with miracles but with metaphysical architecture. He was reviving a pattern, a divine geometry buried in the consciousness of humanity. Some scholars and mystics believe many of the 72 may have traveled far eastward, toward India, Tibet, Persia, and even China. These were not random destinations. Trade and cultural routes like the Silk Road connected these regions. But it wasn't only goods that traveled along these roads, ideas, prayers, philosophies, and rituals moved with them. Wisdom flowed like rivers through the ancient world. In Eastern traditions, mysterious visitors sometimes appear in historical texts, bearded sages from the West who spoke profound truths, then vanished without seeking fame. Could some of these have been among the 72? In Ethiopia, we find another thread. The ancient church that traces its roots not to Roman missionaries but to mystical messengers whose teachings came not with swords or sacraments, but with songs of the soul. Local stories speak of visitors, men and women, who healed, taught, and then disappeared. They were not church builders. They were soul awakeners. In Gnostic texts and apocryphal gospels, like those attributed to Thomas and Philip, we encounter a different voice, one more mystical, symbolic, internal. These writings didn't make it into the official canon. And yet, they carry the resonance of someone who had been directly and deeply touched by Jesus, not just as a teacher, but as a transmitter of spiritual fire. In these texts, the kingdom of God isn't a place. It's a state. It lives inside. It is realized through inner transformation, not outer obedience. This is precisely the kind of teaching one would expect from someone who had been trained by Jesus not to found an institution, but to light the flame of direct divine contact. Why is so little known? Because their work required it. These disciples didn't work through spectacle. Their mastery was in presence, in energy, in sacred silence. They didn't impose truths, they activated them. They were catalysts, not commanders. They understood something crucial. True transformation comes not from external force but from inner combustion. And there was another reason for their silence: survival. The Roman Empire did not tolerate unregulated spiritual influence. Nor did the dominant Jewish authorities of the time. The teachings of the 72, which transcended rigid doctrine and embraced universal spirit, posed a threat. Persecution followed. Many likely perished. Others went underground, preserving their mission through other means, through frequency, ritual, and the living transmission of energy. And yet, the earth remembers. In Sufi dances, in Lebanese chants, in Coptic hymns and Hebrew invocations, traces of the 72 remain. Stories of unknown masters, healers, dream interpreters, sacred herbalists, drift like wind through the pages of folk memory. Geometries in sacred art mirror Kabbalistic structures. Patterns emerge. Whispers grow louder. Their legacy is not in cathedrals or councils, but in hearts set on fire across time. The 72 were spiritual gardeners. They sowed not crops but consciousness. They planted seeds meant to bloom centuries later, in minds not yet born, in lands not yet mapped. Their success was never measured by crowds. Their reward was not recognition, but regeneration. And Jesus knew this. He didn't need them to build temples or write books. He needed them to carry a living code. To walk like tuning forks across the earth, adjusting its spiritual tone. They were not martyrs of theology. They were carriers of the eternal. Not servants of a religion, but guardians of the essence. Their silence was not absence. It was protection. It was power. And it still speaks. Not to the ears, but to the soul. Have you heard it? Perhaps it is speaking to you now. The gospel of presence, how the 72 disciples planted an invisible revolution that still blooms today. Some truths are whispered, not shouted. They echo in the stillness between words, in the silence of sacred places, in the gaze of one awakened soul meeting another. And perhaps the most profound teachings of Jesus, those that continue to shape the spiritual foundation of humanity, were never meant to be recorded in Scripture at all. They weren't inked onto scrolls or carved into stone. They were lived, breathed, and carried by 72 mysterious disciples who walked the earth like quiet flames, present, radiant, unseen. Each civilization these disciples touched was left with a spark. Sometimes that spark remained dormant for generations, waiting for the fertile soil of human consciousness to ripen. But when it did awaken, it became a light that could not be extinguished. Today, when we look across the world's spiritual traditions, we see scattered fragments of the same light. There's a golden thread connecting them all, an invisible weaving of truths that transcend language, culture, and creed. And maybe, just maybe, that thread was first spun by the silent feet of the 72. They didn't travel with trumpets or banners. They moved like the wind, quiet, powerful, transformative. Like soft rain nourishing thirsty soil, their presence brought life without demanding attention. Like the hush of dawn, they transformed the world not with noise, but with vibration. Could it be that the true gospel of Jesus was not written, but lived? Not taught, but transmitted? And if so, then perhaps these 72 were its first and most faithful guardians. The kind of knowledge they carried could never be captured in language. It was too alive, too multidimensional. It passed from soul to soul like a scent, a frequency, a resonance that only those already vibrating with it could detect. It's said that in early mystical and Gnostic circles, there were always two levels of teaching: the exoteric, spoken in parables for all to hear, and the esoteric, hidden in symbols, revealed only to those prepared to receive it. The 72 were steeped in the esoteric. Their path wasn't about doctrine, but direct experience. They didn't memorize theology. They embodied it. They were not merely listeners of truth. They became the truth in motion. Their gospel wasn't a scroll. It was a state of consciousness. When Jesus taught them, he didn't simply offer words. He expanded their energetic field. He activated ancient memories, embedded deep within the soul long before birth. These weren't new ideas, they were eternal truths being reawakened. That's why many of them, according to apocryphal texts, experienced sudden and profound spiritual transformations after encountering Christ, as if something forgotten within them had been reignited. What they received went beyond intellectual understanding. It was an ignition of presence. Among their practices were techniques we now associate with Eastern spirituality, long before they were formally systematized. Silent meditation, inner light visualization, healing by touch, breath control, sacred fasting. They used these not for discipline or punishment, but to fine-tune themselves as instruments of divine resonance. Their mission wasn't to spread a religion about Jesus. It was to awaken the Christ within each person. Christ, for them, was not just a man, it was a universal, cosmic principle, a presence that lives in every being, waiting to be remembered. The kingdom of God wasn't a future reward or a physical empire. It was here. It was now. It was within. And that's why they didn't seek pulpits or crowds. They weren't competing for attention. They were mirrors, activating the sacred in others simply by being fully present. Their purpose wasn't to convert, but to awaken. Not to impose, but to inspire. They didn't carry doctrines. They carried presence. Wherever they walked, through forests, deserts, villages, they left behind more than footprints. They left behind a frequency shift. The world tilted slightly toward light in every place they touched. And it didn't require speeches. Their very being was the message. It's no coincidence that the official Gospels omit this part of the story. In those days, oral transmission was the preferred method for preserving sacred knowledge. What was holy was not exposed to political corruption or religious control. It was whispered, held in the body, passed from master to disciple through presence alone. Even so, remnants survive. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, "Whoever drinks from my mouth will become as I am, and I will become him, and the hidden things will be revealed to him." This is not a call to believe, but to become. To merge with the Christ within. To allow the separation between teacher and student, God and human, to dissolve completely. This was the true teaching of the 72. A path of silent revolution. A flame passed from soul to soul. Their practice of silence was not emptiness, it was fullness. In many mystical traditions, silence is understood as the language of God. To be silent is to listen. Not to the world's noise, but to the voice that speaks from the deepest core of the self. The 72 were trained to still the ego, to quiet the mind, to attune themselves to that inner whisper that guides without words. This kind of teaching doesn't need parchment. It doesn't fade with time. It lives on, implanted in hearts, waiting to bloom. And bloom it did. In the centuries that followed, across Syria, Armenia, Ethiopia, Asia Minor, and beyond, pockets of mystical communities gathered. In hidden caves and secret sanctuaries, they preserved these practices, chanting sacred names, performing breathwork, using geometry to reflect divine order. These are not inventions of later theology. They are echoes of the original fire. Some of these rituals closely resemble the practices found in Islam, the mystical tradition of Orthodox Christianity rooted in repetitive prayer and the quest for inner illumination. Others show up in Islamic Sufi orders, in early Eastern Christian sects, and in hidden lineages that pass through whispered memory rather than written decree. And perhaps the most beautiful mystery is this: the 72, knowing the world was not yet ready, embedded their teachings into symbols, mandalas, hymns, architectural codes, sacred patterns. They left behind not manifestos, but maps. Clues designed only to be unlocked by those resonating at the same frequency. Because this gospel of inner awakening, was never about belief. It was about transformation. It was not a new religion. It was a reactivation of the divine in each person. Maybe the 72 weren't just messengers. Maybe they were activators. and their mission is only fulfilled when someone, somewhere, maybe even you, hears that inner call and begins to awaken. Their legacy is still alive. It writes itself, line by line, not on pages, but in souls. This, in truth, was the revolution Jesus began with them, not a religion of dogma and conquest, but a movement of quiet awakening. A path without walls, without hierarchy, without fear. A living gospel that requires no temple, only willingness. It lives today in anyone who dares to listen, feel, and awaken. Although the names of the 72 have vanished into the mists of history, their flame endures, passed silently through generations of spiritual seekers, mystics, and teachers. These heirs did not claim titles. They didn't seek applause. They knew that sacred work blooms best in silence. And that's why the signs still appear in the most unexpected places. Soon after Jesus' physical departure, new spiritual communities arose. Gnostic circles such as the Alphites, Valentinians, and Scythians preserved a Christ that was not confined to crucifixion but illuminated from within. They spoke of divine light, of self-knowledge as salvation, and of the material world as a veil concealing higher realities. Many scholars today believe these communities were not heretics, but direct descendants, guardians of the wisdom passed from the 72. They were persecuted by empire and church alike. But like seeds scattered on the wind, they traveled, settled, and blossomed across distant lands. So we must ask ourselves now, not only who were the 72, but, are they gone? Or do they still walk the earth, unrecognized, unnoticed, planting quiet flames wherever they go? Could you be one of them? Could your life, your presence, your awakening, be part of the same great unfolding? The gospel of presence continues. And if you're listening closely enough, you already know that it's calling you too. The eternal echo of the 72, tracing the secret lineage that shaped spiritual history. There are mysteries that echo across time, not as myths, but as hidden truths waiting for the right moment to resurface. One such mystery surrounds the enigmatic group known as the 72 disciples. Unlike the 12 apostles whose names and deeds are well recorded, these 72 remain shrouded in silence. And yet, their influence may be far greater, their legacy woven into the very fabric of the world's deepest spiritual traditions. Could the teachings of Jesus, his highest and most sacred transmissions, have been carried not in scripture, but in silence? Passed not through books, but through presence? Could the 72 have ignited an underground spiritual lineage that continues to pulse through mystics, healers, artists, and seekers even today? Let us take a journey through time, across deserts, through temples, and across continents, to follow the trail of this invisible brotherhood, a trail that begins in ancient Persia and leads us into the heart of our own awakening. Are you ready to rediscover what has always lived beneath the surface? Let's begin. In ancient Persia, a new spiritual current emerged through the teachings of Mani, the founder of the Manichaean tradition. His philosophy blended the essence of esoteric Christianity with elements from Buddhism and Zoroastrianism, creating a tapestry that emphasized duality, light and darkness, spirit and matter, and the sacred duty of awakening. Mani claimed to have received revelations from a divine master of light. Was he a distant heir of the same transmission that Jesus entrusted to the 72? The resonance is unmistakable. As we cross centuries, we arrive in medieval France, where the Cathars flourished, bearers of what many consider the purest flame of initiatory Christianity. They stood boldly apart from the Roman Church, rejecting its authority and institutions. Instead, they lived lives of simplicity, spiritual rigor, and deep mystical insight. The Cathars taught reincarnation, divine origin, and the presence of Christ not as a church founder, but as a revealer of forgotten divinity. They called themselves good Christians, but more importantly, they lived as awakened souls, echoes, perhaps, of the same lineage. Many among them claimed their spiritual roots predated Rome. They spoke of a transmission that came from the East, long before dogmas hardened into institutions. Could this be the whisper of the 72? Simultaneously, in the Islamic world, the Sufi mystics began to bloom like wildflowers after a secret rain. These lovers of God spoke of inner union through music, ecstatic dance, sacred poetry, and the silence of the soul. They sought not ritual compliance but direct contact with the divine. Great Sufi masters like Rumi, Al-Ghazali, and Ibn Arabi spoke of a universal wisdom that transcended all formal religion, a truth found only within. The parallels with the inner gospel of the 72 are profound. Is it far-fetched to imagine that some among the 72, or their spiritual descendants, passed through the East and inspired these mystical flames? Then we enter medieval Europe once more. Secret initiatory orders began to emerge. The Templars, the Rosicrucians, the early spiritual Masons. Their symbols, the rose, the cross, the chalice, the number 72, the ladder of Jacob, did not come from the Vatican's archives. These were transmissions from a far older current. They did not mimic scripture. They remembered something deeper. Among these orders, the Rosicrucians were perhaps the clearest inheritors of the 72's legacy. They spoke openly of invisible masters, wise beings who lived in silence, appearing only when humanity was ready. They promised a union of science and spirit, matter and soul, and an alchemical transformation of the human being. They didn't offer dogma. They offered initiation. And always, the message remained the same. What is essential is invisible. What is holy cannot be captured in words. It must be lived. By the 18th and 19th centuries, this current surfaced again. Esoteric thinkers such as Eliphas Levi, Helena Blavatsky, and Rudolf Steiner spoke of secret spiritual networks. They wrote of masters working across generations, not in public view, but in inner guidance, planting ideas that would shape not only religion, but philosophy, science, and art. Blavatsky even claimed that some of Jesus' disciples had not left the earth, but continued to serve from higher planes, influencing sensitive souls and spiritual pioneers. Steiner, in his Anthroposophy, taught that human consciousness evolves in cycles, and that in every era, advanced souls reincarnate to help humanity through its spiritual transitions. Is this not what the 72 were always meant to be? Not missionaries of belief, but catalysts of awakening? Even in Renaissance art, we find traces of the invisible wisdom. The works of Botticelli, Michelangelo, and Da Vinci are riddled with sacred geometries, mystical postures, and symbolic codes. Their paintings weren't just beauty. They were blueprints. Spiritual maps disguised in brushstrokes. Some believe these artists were not only geniuses, they were channels. Their muse? The same silent current passed down from the 72. Today, in movements like Theosophy, Anthroposophy, and even strands of Spiritism, we find echoes of this ancient mission. They speak of souls who come with purpose, forget who they are, and then awaken to serve. They describe invisible councils, groups of spiritual beings guiding the evolution of humanity from behind the veil. They teach that this sacred work continues, not in rituals, but in transformation. So where are the heirs of the 72 now? They may be sitting beside you. They may be working in schools, hospitals, community gardens, or libraries. They are not celebrities. They do not wear robes or claim titles. But they carry an unmistakable light. They bring warmth into a room without speaking. They heal without laying hands. They teach without needing a pulpit. Their lives are sermons. They are therapists, artists, dreamers, mothers, musicians, wanderers. And they are awakening, one by one, to the fire they have always carried inside. This lineage does not demand temples. It cannot be organized. It flows where hearts are open and minds are free. Its members recognize one another not by creed, but by presence. They see the light in one another's eyes. They know by the silent agreement of the soul, we are here to serve the light. We are the continuation of the 72. Before Jesus, these schools already existed. In Egypt, in India, in the caves of the Essenes, in the wisdom of the Pythagoreans. Their core teaching was always the same: self-knowledge is the doorway to divine union. Masters did not impose belief, they activated memory. They didn't offer answers. They offered tools. When Jesus came, he didn't dismantle these traditions. He fulfilled them. He became the apex of an ancient pyramid of spiritual insight. The Egyptians had Thoth, the god of wisdom. The Hindus had Krishna. The Greeks had Orpheus and Pythagoras. But Jesus took their teachings and gave them life in motion. And when he sent out the 72, he wasn't merely dispatching evangelists. He was continuing the practice of ancient masters, training initiates, activating their inner vision, and sending them to the corners of the earth not to preach, but to vibrate truth. Their training was not academic. It was experiential. It included breath, fasting, energy work, contemplation, and most of all, presence. These weren't practices to learn, they were tools to remember the divine within. The 72 were walking temples. Where they went, heaven followed. This is what it means to be touched by an avatar. In Eastern thought, an avatar is not just enlightened. An avatar is the embodiment of divine consciousness in form. Krishna, Buddha, and Jesus are such figures, not teachers, but bridges. And their initiates are not students, but sparks. When you stand near them, something in you awakens. For the 72, this awakening was subtle but irreversible. Many didn't even understand it with the mind. They simply knew that everything had changed. That the veil had lifted. That the world was now alive in a way it hadn't been before. Jesus didn't teach ideas. He triggered inner earthquakes. He opened doors that would never close again. The training was not in theory, it was in presence. This way of transmission, direct, silent, wordless, is known in many traditions. In Zen Buddhism, it's called Satori, a sudden awakening. In Sufism, it's Fana, the dissolution of ego into divine unity. In Hermeticism, it is the great union with the All. And so the 72 were not relics of the past. They were the beginning of an eternal lineage. One that moves not through books, but through burning hearts. One that cannot be seen, but can be felt. One that doesn't seek to be known, only to serve. And you, reading this now, might be closer to that lineage than you realize. The silent fire, unveiling the spiritual legacy of the 72 and their enduring presence across ages. What if the fire of awakening was never meant to be broadcast from rooftops, but instead kindled in silence, transferred from soul to soul, eye to eye, heart to heart? What if the most powerful spiritual teachings were never written, never institutionalized, but lived? What if the 72 disciples, chosen by Jesus, were not just evangelists but eternal bearers of a light that transcends time, space, and religious boundaries? The true master doesn't implant something new in the disciple. He awakens what is already there, hidden, dormant, waiting. Jesus didn't impose knowledge. He ignited it. His voice, his presence, his very gaze carried a spark capable of turning mere embers into flames. And those 72 he chose became living torches, human lighthouses walking quietly into the farthest corners of the earth. But this kind of initiation was not granted to everyone. It wasn't based on lineage or social status. Jesus didn't care for titles or appearances. He looked for hearts ready to be transformed. He chose those who were attuned to the invisible, those with the courage to let go of their old selves in order to be reborn. Some came from the lowest rungs of society, tax collectors, wandering healers, shepherds, humble women. Yet in their gaze, he saw the ember. He breathed into it. It became divine fire. Jesus' teachings were never meant to be conventional. He didn't speak plainly to please. He spoke in parables, living stories encoded with spiritual symbols, truths designed to bypass the mind and speak directly to the soul. The 72 were trained to decode this language of mystery. They didn't just listen to birdsong or observe the wind. They interpreted these as messages. Creation itself became their holy scripture, and Jesus was the guide who taught them how to read it. Rituals too were essential, not as empty ceremonies, but as doors to expansion. Sharing bread and wine became a mystical act. Hand gestures, sacred touch, river immersions, fasting and isolation, all were steps in an inner transmutation. Every act carried intention. Every encounter with Jesus marked the soul like fire etching stone. There are accounts suggesting that after this deep preparation, some among the 72 developed extraordinary capacities, healing through vibration and words, reading auras, communicating with the elements. Not to impress, not to gain followers, but as the natural unfolding of a being fully aligned with divine presence. Jesus warned them, never cling to the signs. The true miracle is not walking on water, it is the heart awakened to love. Because he was not only a teacher, he was an initiating master. His vibration was so elevated, so alive, that it rippled through every soul near him. In distant lands, India, Egypt, even within the Essene Brotherhood, there are echoes of a radiant figure from the West, a prophet who healed, who taught unity, who reflected divine consciousness. Jesus transcended the narrow frames of religion. The 72 became his multipliers, each a unique reflection of his light, not clones, but individual flames, each burning with a color of its own. To be part of this lineage meant knowing who you were, not in the egoic sense, but in sacred humility. To serve without seeking praise. To teach without demanding followers. To heal and then vanish. To live the truth, not preach it. This was the silent revolution Jesus began, not through conquest, but through inner awakening. True teaching, he showed, is not a transmission of facts. It is the awakening of what already lives within the other. The 72 didn't walk the earth with loud proclamations. They walked as quiet beacons, radiating a message far more potent than words. Over the centuries, humanity has witnessed inexplicable waves of spiritual insight, healing miracles, waves of wisdom, revolutionary movements of inner freedom that rose from nowhere. Or so it seemed. But maybe they were not random. Maybe they were echoes, reverberations of the 72's sacred work continuing in secret. Perhaps their successors still walk among us, guiding consciousness, quietly shifting the balance toward light. Many stories throughout history tell of mysterious beings who appear during times of darkness. They offer clarity, guidance, healing, then vanish without a trace. Could these be modern embodiments of that ancient lineage? Among the indigenous tribes of South America, there are oral stories of luminous men who came long before the conquistadors, beings who spoke of the heart, of light, of the sacredness of the earth. Were these travelers echoes of the 72? The idea seems almost fantastical. And yet, it fits. It fits the logic of a silent mission, a global network of light never needing credit, only committed to awakening. In medieval Europe, during the harshest periods of religious repression, seeds that had been planted centuries earlier began to bloom. Movements like the Cathars emerged again, speaking of reincarnation, inner light, feminine spiritual authority. Their teachings weren't just brave. They were advanced, almost prophetic. They didn't arise in a vacuum. They felt like the blossoming of something sown in the soil of the soul long ago. And in the Orthodox Christian tradition, there are tales of the Startse, wise ascetics who lived in deserts, forests, mountaintops. They never sought followers, yet those who found them were changed forever. Reports speak of these holy ones emitting light, foretelling events, healing with presence alone. These are not legends, they're testimonies. Could these startseed have carried the frequency of the 72? Even in Jewish Kabbalah, there's a belief in the Lamed Vav Tzadikim, the 36 hidden righteous ones whose mere existence sustains the world. They don't know their own identities. They don't seek recognition. Yet they live in service, embodying divine balance. Could the 36 be a partial expression, a remembrance, of the deeper lineage of the 72? In Sufi mysticism, there's the concept of the Abdul, hidden saints, spiritual guardians who emerge in times of crisis. Poets, healers, beggars, travelers, ordinary in appearance, but carrying an extraordinary essence. This idea is no accident. It is another thread in a global pattern, a truth too consistent, too widespread to dismiss. There are always emissaries of light among us, and they do not announce themselves. Even figures like Francis of Assisi bear this signature. He was not a critic of the church. He simply lived outside of it, radiating purity, speaking to animals, embracing the divine in nature. He needed no title to heal, no throne to transform. Could his soul have once burned among the original 72, or been reawakened by their timeless guidance? And what of the mystics, Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Hildegard of Bingen, Meister Eckhart? They spoke not from doctrine but from experience. They did not parrot theology. They described what they saw in silence, what they felt in light. They challenged institutions by simply living the truth. Each one of them was persecuted, but each one left behind a vibration that still moves the earth. During the Renaissance, there was an explosion of sacred art, architecture, and symbolic wisdom. This was no accident. It was an unveiling. Da Vinci did sacred geometry in his works. Botticelli's birth of Venus reawakened archetypes dormant in the collective psyche. These weren't just artists. They were channels, carriers of memory, silent students of an invisible school. Were they heirs to the 72? It seems likely, because even in collective events, those that seem to emerge without warning, shifting culture in ways we can't trace, there is the fingerprint of a spiritual intelligence, a guiding force that moves not in force, but in silence. And so the question is no longer whether the 72 existed. They did. The question is, do they still walk among us? The answer might lie not in the heavens, but in our own hearts. In the quiet call we sometimes feel, to serve, to heal, to love without reason. Maybe we are their descendants, not by blood, but by vibration. And maybe, just maybe, the flame they carried is already burning within you. Are you ready to let it blaze? The quiet return, how the spirit of the 72 still moves among us today. In a world that seems to be spinning faster than ever, saturated with data, images, voices, and noise, there remain moments when time stands still. A hand reaches out during despair. A stranger speaks words you needed to hear. A dream leaves you in tears upon waking. These aren't coincidences. They may be glimpses, quiet but profound, of something much older, much deeper, much more real than most dare to believe. Something connected to the 72. Not 72 men and women frozen in time, but a spiritual vibration. An eternal flame that, once lit, never extinguishes. Carried forward through generations not by those who claim titles, but by those whose hearts carry truth. The kind of people who appear during the world's darkest hours, not to preach or command, but to hold, to calm, to awaken. These souls may come as nurses in war zones, as elders in tribal villages, as a child with eyes that seem to remember another world. They may have no name history will record. They ask for nothing, but their presence shifts everything. It brings warmth to cold spaces, stillness to chaos. Their gift is not instruction. It is vibration. And that vibration speaks a language older than words, the language of the soul. Even in our modern age, surrounded by science and skepticism, reports quietly continue. Stories of people who appear out of nowhere, say just the right thing, and vanish without trace. Dreams in which figures of light offer messages that feel more real than waking life. These aren't simply anecdotes. They are threads, remnants of a fabric woven long ago by hands that worked in silence. That fabric is still being woven. The Order of the 72, if we understand it as a spiritual field rather than an institution, has never disappeared. It isn't something you join. It is something you remember. It activates when your heart is open enough, your ego quiet enough, your intention pure enough. And those who operate within this current don't announce themselves. They don't wear uniforms or titles. Their recognition comes not from others, but from within. Throughout history and across every culture, you'll find them. Not as saviors, but as mirrors. They reflect what is already in you. They remind you of your own light. And they do so quietly, often anonymously, without ever drawing attention to themselves. That's part of the design. Today, we live in paradox. We've never been more connected, and never felt more alone. Never had more access to information, and yet, never been more starved for wisdom. In this endless stream of noise, something deep within us stirs. A quiet unrest. A yearning. A sense that something vital has been lost, and must be found again. That very yearning is the signal that the 72 are returning. But not as religious figures or founders of new sections. Their return is subtle. Like the scent of rain on dry earth. Like a memory just at the edge of your awareness. They reappear not in temples, but in street corners, schoolyards, forest paths, hospital rooms. In souls who begin to feel a pull they cannot explain. A sudden desire to help, to serve, to heal. A longing to make life sacred again. They do not know where this impulse comes from. But they know they cannot ignore it. The call doesn't come through megaphones. It comes in stillness. It doesn't thunder, it whispers. It awakens not through dramatic miracles, but through slow remembrance. Many who feel this call have never heard of the 72. Yet they move as if initiated by the same master. They carry themselves with quiet dignity. They offer kindness without motive. They don't seek to lead, but end up guiding. They don't seek to be seen, but are impossible to ignore. Across the planet, spiritual awakenings are becoming more frequent. People of all ages are experiencing sudden shifts, dreams that feel prophetic, synchronicities that are too precise to dismiss, a sense of being guided by something unseen. Some begin to develop healing hands. Others find themselves letting go of old lives and stepping into something utterly new, without knowing why. At the same time, there's a blossoming of movements rooted in ancient truths, conscious education, meditation circles, healing arts, sacred activism, ecological stewardship. These aren't random. They're part of the same vibrational wave. As if the spiritual DNA of the 72 was reactivating, cell by cell, soul by soul, across the planetary body. Even silence itself is being revalued. More and more people turn away from the noise of dogma. They long not for another sermon, but for experience. For direct contact with the divine. They gather not in cathedrals, but in forests, living rooms, under stars. They seek not hierarchy, but harmony. This is the kind of sacred space the 72 once created, and are quietly restoring again. Children, too, are showing signs. Young souls, many barely able to articulate their experience, are speaking truths that resonate beyond their years. They are naturally compassionate, empathic, and intuitively spiritual. They recoil from falseness and hunger for authenticity. These may be new incarnations of the old order, or they may be souls born in alignment with this global spiritual reawakening. Even the earth, it seems, is part of this process. Natural disasters, pandemics, environmental shifts, they're not just crises. They're catalysts. They crack the illusions. They force us to feel, to question, to turn inward. And in that turning, the whispers become louder. That's when the new emissaries rise. They are not saviors. They are lighthouses. They don't rescue others. They shine so others may find their own way. Their work is varied. Some teach, some heal, some create art, others simply hold space in their communities. Some are seen. Most are not. But all feel, deep within, that they are part of something greater. And that the time is now. There are no meetings, no charters, no secret handshakes. The only rule is truth. The only compass is love. And those who are part of this field recognize one another instantly. Not by name, but by gaze. By energy. By resonance. They don't compete. They don't argue. They don't try to be first. Because they know that they are fragments of one whole, threads of the same cloth, stars in the same constellation. The mission is fulfilled only when each part plays its role in harmony. So, the return of the 72 is not a myth. It is not a story of the past. It is happening now. Not in institutions. Not in public movements. But in the hearts of thousands of people who are waking up to their soul's memory. They don't need to say it out loud. Their vibration says enough. Maybe you felt it too. A sense that you are here for something more. That your suffering was not meaningless. That your longing is not madness. That your heart carries a map, a flame, a mission. If so, you may already be one of them. Your presence, your silent, humble, luminous presence, might already be turning darkness into dawn for someone. And you don't need to do anything differently. You only need to listen to that voice inside. The one that's been calling you home. Because everything you've heard about the 72, their secret mission, their timeless presence, their return, may not be a tale to entertain you. It may be a mirror, reflecting a truth you've always carried, quietly waiting to be remembered. So ask yourself, not someday, but now. Have you heard the call? And are you ready to answer it? The living light, the return of the 72 and the silent revolution of the soul. Have you ever had that deep, unshakable sense that life must mean more than what we're taught? That beyond the daily routine, beyond what the world sees, there's something calling, something ancient, powerful, and alive inside you? You may feel it when tears come unbidden in the presence of beauty. You may sense it in the ache you feel when injustice strikes. Or in that sacred silence when your heart whispers that you're not here by accident. If you've ever had this knowing, even for a moment, then maybe, just maybe, this isn't the first time your soul has heard the call. And maybe you were never meant to simply live a normal life. Because the invisible order of the 72, the sacred lineage of light, was never about hierarchy or recognition. It didn't select people based on titles or accomplishments. It chose based on energy, on openness, on the courageous willingness to hold the light even when the world is drowning in shadow, to serve without praise, to awaken without applause. This order reveals itself only to those who dare to look inward, to listen closely to that barely audible voice beneath the noise of the world. It doesn't need ceremonies or rituals. No formal initiation marks its presence. Its activation comes through resonance, when your life starts to align with truth, with integrity, with compassion and purpose. When you begin to live your truth instead of chasing validation, you tune in. You become a center of healing, a source of transformation, a living node in a sacred, invisible network that is older than time. And though this mission may feel small, unnoticed by the masses, it is what changes the world. Because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs those who hold space with quiet strength. It doesn't need more critics. It needs those who listen, understand, and embrace. It doesn't need more rules. It needs more love. To walk this path is not to shine for attention, but to shine because you cannot help but be light. It is to live knowing that what you do may never be seen by the world, but is seen by the soul of the universe itself. There are countless people who are part of this mission and don't even realize it. They simply follow an inner knowing, a pull toward service, a hunch they can't ignore. They're guided not by maps or manuals, but by dreams, synchronicities, visions, quiet intuitions. They know, somehow, that none of their pain was meaningless. That each loss, each silence, each rebirth, was part of an invisible training. And others, those who have heard the call, may still hesitate. They fear standing out. They doubt their worthiness. They wait for a sign that may never come in the way they expect. But the mission never asked for perfection. It only asks for honesty. It doesn't require you to have the answers. It only asks for your presence. Say yes with your heart, and the path will form beneath your feet. Because once you say yes, something shifts. The world begins to conspire with your soul. Invisible hands move with you. Energy clears. Synchronicity flows. And you are never alone again. The order of the 72 doesn't need to be declared aloud. You'll know when you've joined, because everything in your life will begin to transform. When you speak love into hate, when you choose stillness over reaction, when you respond to pain with peace, you activate the order. With each act of compassion, each breath of truth, each silent, soul-centered decision, you are living the mission. And this mission is not about religion. It's about remembering who you really are. It's about becoming the embodiment of divine presence, not through belief, but through frequency. You are not just here to learn about Christ, you are here to be Christ consciousness in action. This is where it all connects. The 72 who walked with Jesus 2 millennia ago. The monks and mystics who lit candles in the caves. The artists who wove light into paint and stone. The healers and teachers of today. The quiet souls meditating in solitude. The dreamers. The wounded who learn to radiate love. All are part of the same radiant thread, a divine tapestry being rewoven through time. All are living instruments of the same sacred music. If you've read this far, perhaps this truth is already pulsing in your chest. Perhaps you didn't find this message by chance. Perhaps it found you. Because this isn't just information, it's remembrance. A soul memory. A spiritual activation. A deep certainty rising from within, whispering that you are ready to live a different kind of life. A more truthful one. A more conscious one. A life where your choices ripple beyond your understanding. So the question is no longer, do you believe in the 72? The real question is, what will you do now that your soul remembers? Because knowing is not enough. Now comes the embodiment. Be the silence that transforms noise into peace. Be the gaze that reminds others of their own light. Be the hand that comforts, the presence that heals, the space where truth can breathe. Be the path when others are lost. Be the fire in the dark. Be the vessel through which something eternal flows. The order never died. It was never destroyed. It simply moved into the unseen, waiting for the right time to return. That time is now. And it returns not as a wave of leaders or prophets, but through people like you. Through your yes. Through your willingness to be who you really are. To shine not to be seen, but to guide. To serve not to be praised, but because love compels you. You are the return of the 72. And the secret has always been this. It was never about them. It was always about us. Now it's your turn to speak. Have you ever felt as though you were here for a reason, even if you couldn't name it? Has there been a moment in your life, perhaps a dream, a moment of stillness, a pain that awakened you, a feeling you couldn't explain, where you sensed something greater was guiding you? Maybe now is the moment to give it voice. Leave a comment. Share your awakening, your moment of remembering. A dream, a vision, a turning point. Because when you share your story, you do more than express yourself, you activate your frequency. You add your light to the grid. And others, reading your words, may begin to awaken too. We are forming a living field, a collective vibration. We are not here to follow. We are here to rise. This is a movement of remembrance. A silent revolution of presence. We are the 72 reborn in modern skin. And if this message stirred something in you, if you feel the pull to dive deeper, to uncover what history tried to erase, to understand the mysteries that surrounded Jesus and the Brotherhood of Light, then the next step is already waiting for you. Click the next video. Step into the mystery. Uncover the hidden teachings of Jesus, the secrets of the ancient wisdom schools, and the real reason his light was hidden from history. You'll learn who tried to silence this truth, and how to awaken it again today. This is not the end. It's the first breath of something eternal. The light is calling. And you are the answer.